What if I told you a single meal could unravel decades of hidden prejudice? Imagine a powerful CEO, cloaked in anonymity, stepping into her own elite restaurant, not as a titan of industry, but as an ordinary diner. What she witnesses, the whispers, the sneers, the quiet cruelty changes everything. But here's the twist. She's not just there to eat. She's there to reclaim her empire's soul. And when the truth surfaces, a legacy is on the brink of collapse. The autumn air carried a crisp chill as Abigail Abby Harper stepped onto the bustling streets of downtown Chicago, the city's heartbeat pulsing through the clatter of traffic and the murmur of pedestrians. Towering glass skyscrapers reflected the golden hues of the setting sun, their sleek facades a testament to ambition and power. Abby moved with purpose, her navy sweater and simple slacks blending seamlessly with the crowd of professionals hurrying home. No glittering jewelry adorned her wrists, no designer handbag swung from her shoulder. To anyone passing by, she was just another woman savoring a quiet evening, perhaps on her way to a modest dinner. But Abby was no ordinary woman. She was the CEO of Monarch Steakhouse, a national chain synonymous with luxury, and tonight, she was on a mission. Monarch Steakhouse loomed ahead, its elegant gold-lettered sign glowing under the streetlights of Chicago's financial district. Nestled among banks and corporate towers, this flagship location catered to the city's elite executives sealing million-dollar deals, politicians sipping rare vintages, and high-net-worth individuals who expected nothing less than perfection. The restaurant was Abby's pride, the cornerstone of an empire she built from a single diner in her 20s. Years of grit, late nights, and relentless vision had turned Monarch into a household name, a symbol of quality and exclusivity. But lately, cracks had appeared. Online reviews whispered of poor service, unwelcoming attitudes, and a pattern Abby couldn't ignore. Dismissing them as outliers had been tempting. Every restaurant had its critics, but the complaints were too consistent, too specific. So here she was, not as the CEO who'd graced magazine covers, but as a customer, ready to see her creation through unfiltered eyes. Abby paused outside the heavy glass doors, her reflection faint against the polished surface. She inhaled deeply, steadying herself. This wasn't her first undercover visit. She'd done it before, slipping into Monarch's kitchens or dining rooms to ensure her standards were met. But tonight felt different. The weight of those reviews, the nagging sense that something was deeply wrong, pressed against her chest. She pushed open the door, stepping into a world she'd crafted, but now felt oddly foreign. The scent of grilled steak and truffle butter enveloped her, rich and intoxicating. The ambience was warm, luxurious, without being ostentatious soft. Jazz drifted from hidden speakers. Dim lighting cast a golden glow over crisp white tablecloths, and polished mahogany floors gleamed underfoot. A hostess in an elegant black dress greeted her with a practiced smile. "Table for one?" she asked, her tone polite but detached. "Yes, please," Abby replied, her voice calm and unremarkable. She followed the hostess to a booth near the back, a perfect vantage point to observe the dining floor. The leather seat was plush, the menu in her hands embossed with Monarch's crest. But Abby wasn't here to dine. She was here to watch, to listen, to uncover the truth behind those whispers that first. Everything seemed in order. Servers moved with choreographed precision, their black vests crisp, their smiles polished. A couple in designer attire received effusive wine recommendations, their glasses refilled with flourish. A group of businessmen laughed heartily, their table attended by two servers who anticipated every need. Abby's trained eye noted the efficiency, the charm, the hallmarks of Monarch's reputation. But then, the air shifted. The entrance bell chimed, and a woman stepped inside. She was in her mid-50s, her faded gray coat slightly oversized, her dark hair streaked with silver and pulled into a neat bun. She clutched a small purse, her eyes darting around the opulent room with a hesitancy that suggested she wasn't sure she belonged. Abby's gaze sharpened. The woman Margaret Evans, though Abby wouldn't know her name until later, took a tentative step forward, her shoulders hunched as if bracing for rejection. The hostess's smile faltered, just for a moment before she led Margaret to a table near the kitchen entrance, far from the prime seats. Abby's stomach tightened. She watched as a young waiter approached Margaret, his sharp jaw and confident stride exuding arrogance. "Just the soup?" he asked, his voice laced with amusement when Margaret ordered softly, barely above a whisper. Margaret nodded, her fingers curling into the tablecloth. The waiter's smirk was subtle but unmistakable. "Sure, you don't want the steak? Oh, but I guess that's out of budget." A nearby server snickered, the sound just loud enough to carry. Margaret's face flushed, her eyes dropping to the menu as if it could shield her from the humiliation. Abby's grip on her own menu tightened, her knuckles whitening. She scanned the room, searching for the one person who should have intervened. There, near the bar, stood David Miller, the general manager. In his early 50s, with graying temples and a tailored suit, he carried himself with the ease of a man who'd mastered the hospitality game. His sharp eyes flicked toward Margaret's table, registering the exchange. But he didn't move. He didn't correct the waiter or approach Margaret. Instead, he turned back to a group of suited men, laughing as he poured them another round of wine. Abby's blood simmered. This wasn't a mistake. This was deliberate routine, a culture that thrived under David's watch. The contrast was glaring. Across the room, a woman in glittering jewelry had 3 servers hovering, her every whim met with enthusiasm. A table of executives received complimentary appetizers, their laughter filling the space. But Margaret, seated near the clatter of the kitchen, was invisible. An elderly man at another table waited 10 minutes for his water glass to be refilled, his polite waves ignored. A young couple sharing a modest meal was served with perfunctory efficiency, their presence barely acknowledged. Abby's heart sank. This wasn't the monarch she'd built, the one born from her days as a waitress, where every guest was treated with dignity. This was something else, something rotten. Her mind flashed to a memory, unbidden but vivid. 25 years ago, Abby had been a server in a small diner, her apron stained, her feet aching from double shifts. A customer, an older man in a worn coat, had thanked her for treating him like he mattered, despite his modest order. "You made my day," he'd said, leaving a crumpled dollar tip she knew he couldn't spare. That moment had shaped her vision. For Monarch, a place where every guest felt valued, not judged. How had it gone so wrong? Abby's gaze returned to David, who was now chatting with a VIP, his charm effortless. She noticed another figure, Tom Harris, a veteran server in his 40s, his posture stiff as he whispered to a colleague, their eyes darting toward Margaret's table. Tom's loyalty to David was evident, his subtle nod to the manager a sign of complicity. Abby made a mental note. If David was the root of this culture, Tom was likely his enforcer. She pulled out her phone, opening a private note. 2 words. Dig deeper. She couldn't act yet, not without proof, not without understanding how far this rot had spread. Was it just Chicago, or had other Monarch locations fallen into the same trap? The thought chilled her. She signaled for the check, her meal untouched, and left a modest tip to avoid drawing attention. As she stepped back into the chilly Chicago night, the city's lights blurred before her. Monarch was her legacy, but tonight it felt like a stranger's creation. Back in her hotel room, Abby sat at the desk, her laptop open to Monarch's internal review system. She scrolled through complaints, each one a knife to her pride, ignored because I didn't look rich enough. Servers laughed when I asked for a cheaper option. The manager dismissed my concerns. The pattern was undeniable, stretching back years. She closed her laptop, her jaw set. Tomorrow, she'd return to Monarch, still in disguise, to gather more evidence. But a seed of doubt had taken root, not just in her company, but in herself. How had she missed this? As CEO, this was her failure as much as David's. The city skyline glittered outside, a false promise of perfection. Abby's resolve hardened. She wasn't just fighting for Monarch's reputation. She was fighting for its soul. And somewhere, in the shadows of her empire, a deeper truth waited to be uncovered, one that would test her courage and redefine everything she'd built. The Chicago skyline glittered beyond the hotel window, its lights a constellation of ambition that Abigail Abby Harper barely noticed. She sat at the desk in her suite, her laptop screen casting a pale glow across her face. The events of the previous evening at Monarch Steakhouse were played in her mind like a film she couldn't pause. Margaret Evans's flushed cheeks as the waiter mocked her modest order. David Miller's complacent gaze as he ignored the cruelty, the snicker of a server echoing in the opulent dining room. Abby's fingers hovered over the keyboard, scrolling through customer reviews she'd pulled from Monarch's internal database. Ignored for 20 minutes while wealthier tables were fawned over. Felt like I didn't belong. The manager dismissed my complaint without a second glance. Each comment was a shard of glass, cutting deeper into her pride. Monarch was her legacy, built on the belief that hospitality meant dignity for all. How had it strayed so far? Abby closed her laptop, her jaw tight. Last night's observations had confirmed the reviews weren't isolated incidents. The discrimination was subtle, woven into the fabric of the restaurant's culture. And David Miller, the general manager, was either its architect or its enabler. But was it just Chicago, or had this poison spread to other Monarch locations? The question gnawed at her, as did a flicker of self-doubt. As CEO, she'd trusted her team to uphold her vision. Had she been too distant, too focused on expansion and boardrooms to see the truth? She pushed the thought aside. Doubt could wait. She needed evidence, and she needed it now. The next afternoon, Abby stepped back into Monarch Steakhouse, her appearance deliberately unremarkable. A gray cardigan, simple slacks, and a scarf that softened her sharp features. The lunch crowd was lighter than the dinner rush, a mix of business professionals and a few tourists drawn by Monarch's reputation. She requested a table near the service station, a spot where servers gathered to whisper and regroup. The hostess, a young woman with a clipped smile, led her to a small table tucked against a wall, its position offering a clear view of the dining floor and the staff's interactions. Abby settled in, her menu a prop as her eyes scanned the room. The restaurant hummed with its usual rhythm clinking glasses, the sizzle of steaks from the open kitchen, the soft jazz weaving through murmured conversations. Servers moved with practiced grace, their black vests pristine, their smiles tailored to the guest. Abby noted the efficiency, but her focus was on the cracks in the facade. A table of executives in tailored suits received effusive attention, their wine glasses refilled before they were half empty. A woman in a glittering necklace was offered a complimentary dessert, her server lingering to chat. But then, Abby's gaze fell on a young couple near the window, their clothes neat but modest. Their server delivered their order with a curt nod, no warmth, no extra flourish. When the woman asked for a side of sauce, the server's sigh was barely audible but unmistakable. Abby's stomach churned. She shifted her attention to an elderly man dining alone, his wool coat draped over the chair. His water glass sat empty, ignored as servers bustled past. He raised a hand, polite but tentative, only to be overlooked again. Abby's grip on her menu tightened. The pattern was clear. Wealth and status dictated service, while those who didn't fit Monarch's ideal were sidelined. Her eyes darted to David Miller, who stood near the bar, his graying temples catching the light as he laughed with a VIP guest. His ease, his indifference to the disparities unfolding under his watch, fueled Abby's resolve. Then she noticed her, a server in her mid-20s, moving differently from the others. Sarah Johnson's steps were careful, her posture stiff, as if navigating a space where she didn't fully belong. Unlike her colleagues, she didn't join in the hushed laughter or sly glances exchanged near the service station. When she served a table, her smile was genuine but reserved, her interactions brief but kind. Abby watched as Sarah refilled the elderly man's water glass, offering a quiet apology for the delay. The man's face softened, a small nod of gratitude passing between them. Sarah's unease was palpable, her eyes flicking toward her colleagues, as if expecting reproach. Abby made a decision. When Sarah passed her table, balancing a tray of empty glasses, Abby spoke up. "Excuse me," she said, her tone casual. "I was wondering how long you've worked here." Sarah paused, her dark eyes widening slightly, as if surprised to be addressed. "About 6 months, ma'am," she replied, her voice soft but steady. Abby offered a small smile, keeping her demeanor unthreatening. "It must be busy, especially in a place like this." She let her gaze drift toward the service station, where 2 servers were whispering, their eyes on the young couple. "I couldn't help but notice. Not everyone gets the same kind of service here." Sarah's shoulders tensed, her grip on the tray tightening. For a moment, Abby thought she'd deflect, offer a polite excuse, and move on. But then, Sarah's voice dropped to a near whisper. "It's not always fair," she admitted, her eyes darting to ensure no one overheard. "But I don't want to lose my job." The confession hung between them, fragile but heavy. Abby nodded, her expression reassuring. "I understand," she said, and she did. Sarah was caught in a system she didn't control, her conscience at odds with her survival. Abby let her go, watching as Sarah hurried back to the service station, her head lowered. The interaction confirmed what Abby feared. The problem wasn't just David's leadership. It was a culture that pressured even the well-intentioned to conform. Abby's attention returned to the dining floor, where Tom Harris, the veteran server from the previous night, was speaking with David. Tom's posture was deferential, his nod to David a sign of loyalty. Abby overheard a snippet of their conversation as Tom passed her table. She didn't even touch the bread, like she was saving it for later. The words, aimed at Margaret's table from the night before, were laced with disdain. A younger server nearby chuckled, and Abby's blood simmered. Tom wasn't just complicit, he was an enforcer, reinforcing the hierarchy David had cultivated. Needing more than observations, Abby pulled out her phone and accessed Monarch's internal server, a privilege of her CEO status. She searched for employee communications from the Chicago branch, her fingers moving quickly. Buried in a chain of emails, she found it. A message from David to his staff, dated 6 months prior. "Focus on high-value guests. They're the ones who keep us in business. Don't waste time on tables that won't tip big." The words were a punch to her gut. This wasn't negligence. It was policy, deliberate and documented. Abby's investigation deepened that evening when she met Robert Klein, a former customer who'd contacted her assistant after a negative experience at Monarch. They met at a quiet cafe, Robert's weathered hands cradling a coffee mug as he recounted his story. "I went to Monarch for my wife's birthday," he said, his voice heavy. "We saved for months. But the server treated us like we were invisible, made a joke about us not knowing the menu. I complained to the manager Miller, but he just shrugged." Robert's eyes met hers, raw with hurt. It wasn't about the food. It was about feeling like we didn't matter. Abby listened, her heart aching. Robert's story echoed Margaret's. The online reviews, the elderly man, the young couple. The problem was systemic, rooted in a culture David had nurtured. But a nagging question lingered. Was David acting alone, or was he following a larger directive? The thought chilled her. Monarch had dozens of locations nationwide. If this was happening in Chicago, what about New York, Los Angeles, Miami? Back in her hotel room, Abby sifted through more reviews, her laptop a battlefield of truth. Complaints from other branches mirrored Chicago's. Treated like I didn't belong. Servers prioritized flashier tables. Management ignored us. The scope was staggering, and Abby's self-doubt resurfaced. Had her focus on growth blinded her to this decay? She pushed the thought aside, her resolve hardening. She'd built Monarch from nothing, and she'd rebuild its soul if she had to dawn. As she prepared for bed, a knock at the door startled her. An envelope had been slipped under it, plain and unmarked. Abby's pulse quickened as she opened it, revealing a single typed note. David isn't acting alone. There are bigger forces at play. No signature, no clue to its sender. She stared at the words, her mind racing. Was this a warning, a threat, or a cry for help? One thing was certain. The rot in Monarch ran deeper than one manager, one branch. Tomorrow, she'd return to the restaurant, her disguise intact, to find the truth. But as the city lights flickered outside, Abby felt the weight of a battle she hadn't yet fully understood, one that would test her courage and redefine her. Empire. The Chicago dawn broke with a muted glow, its light filtering through the heavy curtains of Abigail Abbey Harper's hotel suite. She stood by the window, a steaming coffee mug in hand, her mind replaying the anonymous note she'd found under her door. David isn't acting alone. There are bigger forces at play. The words had kept her awake, their ambiguity both a warning and a challenge. 2 days of undercover visits to Monarch Steakhouse had confirmed her worst fears. A culture of discrimination thrived under David Miller's management, with servers like Tom Harris enforcing a hierarchy that favored wealth over dignity. The email she'd uncovered, David's directive to prioritize high-value guests, was damning, but the note suggested a deeper conspiracy. Was David a puppet, or merely the face of a larger problem? Abby's resolve hardened. Today, she'd test him directly, not as a CEO, but as a customer with a point to prove. She dressed with purpose, swapping her nondescript cardigan for a tailored blazer and silk blouse, an outfit that screamed affluence without ostentation. A simple gold necklace added a touch of status, enough to shift how Monarch's staff would perceive her. Abby's plan was simple. Experience the restaurant's service as a VIP, then confront David about the disparities she'd witnessed. Her heart raced not with fear, but with the weight of responsibility. Monarch was her creation, built on the memory of her days as a waitress, where a kind word to a struggling customer meant more than a big tip. The betrayal she felt wasn't just professional. It was personal. Monarch Steakhouse was a hive of activity at dinner time, its gold-lettered sign gleaming under the streetlights. The scent of charred steak and aged wine greeted Abby as she stepped. Inside, the soft jazz and clinking glasses creating a cocoon of luxury. The hostess's smile was warmer this time, her eyes lingering on Abby's blazer. "Table for one, ma'am?" she asked, her tone deferential. "Yes, please," Abby replied, her voice smooth. She was led to a prime table near the center of the dining floor, a stark contrast to the marginal seats she'd been given before. The shift was immediate. Servers hovered, offering wine recommendations before she'd even opened the menu. A young waiter, his vest pristine, presented a complimentary amuse-bouche with a flourish. "Our chef's special," he said, his smile practiced but eager. Abby nodded, her expression neutral, but her eyes scanned the room. The disparities were glaring. A table of executives received effusive attention. their laughter filling the space as servers refilled their glasses. A woman in a glittering gown was offered a private tour of the wine cellar. But across the room, a family of 4, their clothes neat but unremarkable, waited for their server, who delivered their order with a perfunctory nod. An older couple near the kitchen entrance struggled to catch anyone's attention, their water glasses empty. Abby's jaw tightened. The service she received, attentive, almost obsequious, was a privilege reserved for those who fit Monarch's image of wealth. The hypocrisy was suffocating. She spotted David Miller near the bar, his graying temples catching the light as he chatted with a suited man, his charm effortless. Tom Harris lingered nearby, his eyes darting across the dining floor, a silent enforcer of David's unspoken rules. Abby's gaze shifted to Sarah Johnson, the server who'd admitted the unfairness of Monarch's culture. Sarah moved with her usual caution, serving a modest table with quiet kindness, but her shoulders tensed when Tom passed, his glance sharp with disapproval. Abby made a mental note. Sarah was a potential ally, but Tom was a problem. After ordering a modest entree to maintain her cover, Abby signaled for the manager. The waiter hesitated, then nodded. "Of course, ma'am." Moments later, David approached, his suit impeccable, his smile polished. "Good evening," he said, his voice smooth. "I'm David Miller, the general manager. I hope everything is to your satisfaction." Abby met his gaze, her expression calm but unyielding. "That depends," she said, folding her hands on the table. "I couldn't help but notice something about the service here. There's a distinct difference in how certain customers are treated." David's smile didn't falter, but a flicker of unease crossed his eyes. "We take great pride in providing exceptional service to all our guests," he said, his tone rehearsed. "To all of them?" Abby pressed, her voice cool. She gestured subtly toward the family of 4. "That table has been waiting 10 minutes for their server to check in. The couple by the kitchen hasn't had their water refilled. But the table of executives over there hasn't gone a minute without attention. Why is that?" David's smile tightened, his fingers twitching at his sides. "Our staff is trained to ensure high-value guests receive the experience they expect," he said, choosing his words carefully. "It's about exclusivity, which our clientele appreciates." "Exclusivity?" Abby repeated, her tone sharp but controlled. "Or exclusion? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you're deciding who's worthy of respect based on their clothes or their wallet." David's composure slipped, a flush creeping up his neck. "With all due respect, ma'am, you may not understand the dynamics of fine dining. Our guests come here for a certain standard." "I understand enough," Abby cut in, her eyes locked on his. "I understand that no one pays to be ignored, no matter what they're wearing. You're not running a private club, Mr. Miller. You're running a restaurant." She paused, letting her words sink in. "Or maybe you've forgotten what that means." David's jaw clenched, and he forced a nod. "I'll look into it," he said, his voice tight. "Enjoy your meal." He turned away, his stride brisk, but Abby caught the glance he shot at Tom, a silent signal to contain the situation. She exhaled, her heart pounding. The confrontation had been a calculated risk, a way to gauge David's defensiveness. His response deflection, not denial, confirmed he was protecting the status quo. As Abby left the restaurant, the chilly night air bit at her cheeks. She lingered near the entrance, her mind racing, when a familiar figure emerged from a side alley. Margaret Evans, the woman mocked for ordering soup 2 nights ago. Margaret's gray coat was buttoned tightly, her face weary but resolute. Abby hesitated, then approached. "Excuse me," she said softly. "I was in Monarch the other night. I saw what happened." Margaret's eyes widened, then softened with recognition. "Oh," she said, her voice barely audible. "It's not a big deal. I'm used to it." "It is a big deal," Abby said, her tone gentle but firm. "You didn't deserve that. Can you tell me what happened?" Margaret hesitated, then spoke, her words halting but raw. "It was my sister's birthday. I saved up to treat her, thought it'd be special. But the waiter, he laughed when I ordered soup, said it was out of budget. Everyone heard. I felt so small." Her eyes glistened, and Abby's chest tightened. "I complained to the manager, but he just said they were busy. I won't go back." Abby listened, her anger mingling with guilt. "I'm so sorry," she said, meaning it. "That's not what Monarch is supposed to be." She handed Margaret her card, listing only her name and a private email. "If you ever want to talk, please reach out." Margaret nodded, clutching the card like a lifeline, and walked away. Abby stood frozen, Margaret's story echoing Robert Klein's, the online reviews, Sarah's confession. The problem was bigger than David. It was a betrayal of everything she'd built. She needed to act, but she needed more than anecdotes. Evidence, hard and irrefutable, was her weapon. Back in her hotel room, Abby drafted an email to Monarch's board, requesting an internal audit of the Chicago branch. "I've observed concerning patterns and service practices that require immediate review," she wrote, keeping her identity vague to avoid tipping David off. She hit send, her pulse quickening. But the response, arriving within hours, chilled her. Charles Bennett, a senior board member and one of Monarch's original investors, replied curtly, "We trust our managers to maintain standards. An audit seems premature without concrete evidence." The dismissal was polite but pointed, a warning to back off. Abby stared at the screen, the anonymous note's words echoing. Bigger forces at play. Was Charles involved, or was she reading too much into his tone? Her thoughts were interrupted by a notification, a news article from a local outlet. "Monarch Steakhouse under fire. Are service standards slipping?" The piece cited anonymous sources, claiming the Chicago branch prioritized wealthy patrons with quotes eerily similar to Margaret's and Robert's experiences. Abby's heart sank. The story was gaining traction, and she hadn't even begun the fight. Was this a coincidence, or had someone, David, Tom, or even Charles, leaked it to deflect blame? Abby closed her laptop, her resolve steeling. Tomorrow, she'd return to Monarch, her disguise intact, to gather the final pieces of evidence. David's defensiveness, Charles's cold response, and the article's timing were threads in a larger tapestry, one she was determined to unravel. But as the city lights flickered outside, a whisper of doubt crept in. Could she dismantle a culture she'd unknowingly allowed to fester? The battle for Monarch's soul had begun, and Abby was no longer sure who or what she was truly fighting. The Chicago morning was cloaked in a damp mist, the city's skyscrapers shrouded as if guarding secrets. Abigail Abby Harper sat in her hotel suite, her laptop open to a string of emails that had arrived overnight. Her request for an internal audit of Monarch Steakhouse's Chicago branch had been met with a chilling rebuff from Charles Bennett, a senior board member whose curt dismissal, "An audit seems premature," hinted at resistance beyond mere skepticism. The anonymous note she'd received, warning of bigger forces at play, gnawed at her. David Miller's discriminatory culture at Monarch was no accident, and Charles's response suggested he might be shielding it. Abby's confrontation with David the previous night had rattled him, but it wasn't enough. She needed irrefutable proof, and she needed it now. Abby's plan was bold. A surprise inspection by Monarch's corporate team, unannounced to catch David and his staff off guard. She'd coordinated with a trusted ally on the board, Patricia Sullivan, who'd rallied a team of inspectors to arrive at the restaurant by noon. Abby would observe from the shadows, her disguise a simple blouse and slacks, keeping her anonymous. But the stakes were higher than ever. A local article accusing Monarch of elitist service had gained traction, its timing too convenient to be coincidental. Was David deflecting blame, or was someone else, Charles, perhaps pulling strings? Abby's resolve hardened. Monarch was her legacy, and she'd fight to reclaim its soul. At noon, Monarch's steakhouse buzzed with its lunch crowd, the clink of cutlery and murmur of conversations filling the air. Abby slipped inside, requesting a table near the back, her scarf obscuring her features. The hostess barely glanced at her, leading her to a marginal seat, a familiar slight she'd come to expect in her unassuming guise. Abby's eyes scanned the dining floor, noting the same disparities. Wealthy patrons fawned over, modest diners ignored. David Miller stood near the bar, his tailored suit crisp, his smile masking the tension she'd sparked last night. Tom Harris, his loyal enforcer, moved with a scowl, whispering to a server as they eyed a table of casually dressed tourists. The inspection team arrived without fanfare. 3 corporate representatives in plain suits, their clipboards a quiet threat. The lead inspector, a stern man named Victor Lang, addressed the hostess. "We're conducting a quality assessment on behalf of Monarch's corporate office," he said, his tone measured. David's head snapped up, his composure faltering. He approached, his smile forced. "Of course," he said smoothly. "We're happy to cooperate." But his eyes betrayed him, darting to Tom with a silent command to maintain control. Abby watched as the inspectors fanned out, observing servers and noting interactions. The staff adjusted, their movements stiffer, their smiles strained. But the facade cracked when a young server, flustered by the scrutiny, approached an elderly man in a worn coat who just entered. "I'm sorry, sir," the server said, his tone cool, "but I'm not sure we have anything on the menu that'd suit you." The words hung in the air, a blatant misstep. The man's face fell, and Victor's pen moved swiftly across his clipboard. David, across the room, went rigid, his jaw clenching as he realized the damage. Abby's heart sank, not for David's predicament but for the man's humiliation. She recognized the pattern. Margaret Evans, Robert Klein, countless others dismissed for not fitting Monarch's elite image. The inspector's presence exposed what David's charm couldn't hide, but Abby knew this was only the beginning. Tom Harris rallied the staff, his whispered instructions sharp, but the tension was palpable. Sarah Johnson, serving a nearby table, caught Abby's eye, her expression a mix of fear and resolve. Abby nodded subtly, a silent acknowledgement of Sarah's potential as an ally. That evening, Abby attended a charity gala at the Drake Hotel, a glittering affair where Chicago's elite mingled under chandeliers. She wore a midnight blue gown, her presence commanding but understated, her mission clear: confront Charles Bennett. The anonymous note and his dismissive email suggested he was more than a passive board member. She spotted him near the center of the ballroom, his silver hair neatly combed, his sharp blue eyes scanning the crowd with the confidence of a man accustomed to power. Charles had been instrumental in Monarch's expansion, a mentor in her early years, but his traditionalist views now clashed with her vision. Abby approached, her heels clicking softly on the marble floor. "Charles," she greeted, her voice smooth. "I was hoping we'd cross paths." His smirk was subtle, his whiskey glass glinting as he raised it. "Abby," he replied, his tone cordial but edged. "Quite the busy bee, aren't you?" Stirring up trouble at the Chicago branch. She held his gaze, unflinching. "Trouble? I'd call it accountability. I've seen how David Miller runs that restaurant, prioritizing wealth over hospitality. It's not the Monarch I built." Charles chuckled, swirling his drink. "You're naive, Abby. Monarch thrives because of exclusivity. Not everyone belongs in our spaces. Our clientele pays for distinction, not democracy." The words stung, echoing David's defensive, but with a colder certainty. "Distinction? Abby countered, her voice low but sharp. You mean arrogance. No one pays to see others belittled, Charles. If that's your vision, it's a failure. His smirk faded, his eyes narrowing. Be careful, he warned, his voice dropping. You're playing with forces bigger than you realize. Change the rules, and you'll lose more than a few customers. He sipped his whiskey, his gaze piercing. Monarch's success depends on the right people. Push too hard, and you'll find out how quickly they turn. The threat hung between them, veiled but unmistakable. Abby's pulse quickened, but she didn't flinch. Thanks for the advice, she said, her tone icy. Here's mine. I'm not afraid of you. She turned away, her heart pounding, Charles's words echoing the anonymous note. He wasn't just resisting, he was protecting a system, one she was only beginning to uncover. Back at her hotel, Abby faced new challenges. An email from Monarch's legal team reported a lawsuit filed by Robert Klein, the customer she'd met, alleging discriminatory treatment at the Chicago branch. The timing was suspicious, coinciding with the article that had sparked public scrutiny. Abby's mind raced. Had Charles orchestrated this to discredit her? The lawsuit could amplify the negative press, threatening Monarch's reputation before she could act. Worse, she received a forwarded complaint from Tom Harris and a group of veteran servers. Sent to the board. Ms. Harper's interference is undermining our ability to maintain Monarch's elite standards, it read. Her demands for equal service risk alienating our core clientele. The letter, dripping with loyalty to David, accused Abby of destabilizing the restaurant. Tom's influence among the staff was clear, a growing internal threat that could sabotage her reforms. Abby's phone buzzed with another notification, a second article, this one from a national outlet. Monarch's Steakhouse faces backlash. Is the luxury chain losing its edge? The piece quoted insiders claiming Abby's push for democratic service was driving away high-end patrons. The language mirrored Charles's rhetoric, and Abby's suspicion deepened. Was he feeding the press to undermine her? She opened her laptop, pulling up Charles's board profile. His tenure with Monarch spanned decades, his investments pivotal to its growth. But a memory surfaced, sharp and unsettling. 10 years ago, during a board meeting, Charles had insisted on targeting high-net-worth clientele, dismissing Abby's concerns about accessibility. Not everyone's cut out for Monarch, he'd said, his smile patronizing. She'd pushed back then, but the company's rapid expansion had distracted her. Had Charles been shaping Monarch's culture all along? Abby's resolve solidified. The inspection had exposed David's failures, but Charles's warning and the mounting pressures, Tom's rebellion, Klein's lawsuit, the media storm suggested a coordinated effort to stop her. She needed more than evidence now. She needed allies. Sarah's quiet courage, Patricia's support, and even Robert's resolve were threads she could weave into a stronger case. Tomorrow, she'd return to Monarch, her disguise intact, to gather the final pieces. But as the city's mist swirled outside, a new fear took root. If Charles was the puppet master, how far would he go to protect his vision? The Chicago skyline loomed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Monarch Steakhouse's corporate headquarters, its steel and glass a silent witness to the storm brewing within. Abigail Abby Harper stood in the executive suite, her tailored suit a quiet armor, as she prepared for the most critical battle of her career. The past week had been a gauntlet. Her undercover investigation had exposed a culture of discrimination at Monarch's Chicago branch. Her confrontation with David Miller had rattled his smug authority, and her clash with Charles Bennett at the charity gala had revealed a deeper conspiracy. But the anonymous note, David isn't acting alone, and Charles's chilling warning echoed in her mind. Today, the board would decide her fate as CEO, and Abby knew Charles was orchestrating a coup to oust her. The boardroom, was a stark contrast to Monarch's opulent dining rooms. No warm lighting, no clinking glasses, just a long glass table, and a heavy air of inevitability. Abby's eyes were few but fierce. Patricia Sullivan, a board member who'd backed the surprise inspection, had rallied data to support Abby's reforms. Sarah Johnson, the server who'd whispered of Monarch's unfairness, had agreed to testify, her courage a beacon in the chaos. But the opposition was formidable. Charles Bennett, with his decades of influence, had swayed key board members, painting Abby's push for equal service as a betrayal of Monarch's exclusivity. Tom Harris's staff petition and Robert Klein's lawsuit fueled the fire, while a barrage of negative articles, likely Charles's doing, threatened Monarch's reputation. Abby's heart pounded, but her resolve was iron. Monarch was her legacy, and she'd fight to redefine it. The board meeting began at 10 a.m., the room packed with executives and investors, their faces a mix of curiosity and apprehension. Charles sat at the table's center, his silver hair gleaming, his smile a calculated mask. "We're here to address the leadership of Monarch Steakhouse," the chairman, Edward Brooks, announced, his voice grave. "Mr. Bennett has raised concerns about Miss Harper's direction. Charles, you may begin." Charles leaned forward, his tone smooth but lethal. "Monarch is an institution built on prestige," he said, his blue eyes sweeping the room. "Our clientele expects exclusivity, an experience that sets us apart. Miss Harper's insistence on equal service risks alienating our core patrons, as evidenced by declining reservations and negative press. Her actions threaten our brand's legacy. I propose a vote to remove her as CEO." A murmur rippled through the room. Abby met Charles's gaze, unflinching, as Edward nodded for a response. She stood, her voice steady. "Monarch's legacy isn't exclusivity, it's excellence," she said, her words cutting through the tension. "But excellence isn't measured by who we exclude. It's measured by who returns." She clicked a remote, and a screen lit up with graphs. "These are results from 3 Monarch branches, where we've piloted a new service model: fair, respectful, inclusive. Customer retention is up 17%. Repeat business up 22%. Average spending per table up 9%. The numbers don't lie. Treating every guest with dignity isn't destroying Monarch, it's saving it." Board members shifted, some nodding, others skeptical. Charles's smile tightened. "Numbers are one thing," he countered. "Perception is another. Our elite clientele won't tolerate a diluted experience. You're turning Monarch into a chain diner." Abby's eyes flashed. "No one pays to see others humiliated, Charles. That's not luxury, it's arrogance." She turned to the board. "I have a witness who can speak to the culture we're changing." She nodded to Sarah, who entered, her black vest replaced by a simple blazer, her posture rigid but determined. Sarah's voice trembled at first, then steadied. "I've worked at Monarch for 6 months," she said, her dark eyes meeting the board's. "I've seen customers ignored because they didn't look wealthy enough. Servers were told to prioritize high-value tables. When I spoke up, I was ostracized. Ms. Harper's changes are giving people like me a chance to do what's right." Her words landed like a stone in still water, ripples of discomfort spreading. Tom Harris's petition had painted the staff as unified, but Sarah's testimony exposed the lie. Charles's jaw clenched, but he pivoted. "One disgruntled employee doesn't prove a systemic issue," he said. "This is a smear campaign against a proven model." Abby slid a folder across the table. "Then explain this," she said. "Customer complaints from the past 5 years ignored by David Miller. Emails from him directing staff to favor wealthy patrons. And this," she tapped a document. "A report from another branch, same pattern. This isn't one location. It's a culture you've enabled, Charles. The room tensed. Patricia Sullivan leaned forward. "These are serious allegations," she said. "If true, they demand action." But Edward Brooks, swayed by Charles's influence, called for a vote. "Ms. Harper's leadership is at stake," he said. "We need a decision." The vote was agonizing. Each board member's choice, a weight on Abby's shoulders. Patricia and two others supported her, but Charles's allies held firm. The room turned to Thomas Reynolds, a neutral member with a reputation for fairness. His fingers drummed the table, his brow furrowed. "Both sides have merit," he said slowly. "But Monarch's future lies in sustainability, not elitism. I vote for Miss Harper." A collective breath escaped the room. Edward cleared his throat. "The board reaffirms Ms. Harper's leadership." Charles's face darkened, his defeat a crack in his polished facade. Abby exhaled, her victory hard-won but fragile. She knew Charles wouldn't stop. That afternoon, Abby faced the press in a sleek conference room, cameras flashing as she took the podium. The media storm fueled by Charles's leaks had painted her as a reckless reformer. She needed to reclaim the narrative. "There's been talk about Monarch lowering its standards," she began, her voice clear. "Let me be clear. We're raising them. Service isn't about who can afford respect. It's about giving every guest the experience they deserve." She paused, her gaze steady. "Luxury isn't exclusion. It's excellence. If our success depends on making people feel small, we don't deserve to succeed." The room erupted in questions, but one line stood out. If some customers only came to Monarch to feel superior, they were never our customers. The clip went viral within hours, sparking a hashtag dignity for all that trended across social media. Customers shared stories of being dismissed at Monarch and other restaurants, their voices amplifying Abby's message. Elizabeth Ward, a loyal patron, tweeted her support. "Monarch's new vision is why I'll keep coming back." The tide was turning, but Abby knew it wasn't enough. Back at the Chicago branch, Sarah faced fallout. Tom Harris and his allies shunned her, whispering that she'd betrayed the team. During a shift, Tom accidentally spilled wine near her station, his smirk a silent warning. Sarah's hands shook as she cleaned up, but she stood firm, her resolve fueled by Abby's trust. Abby, learning of the incident through Patricia, vowed to protect Sarah, but the internal resistance was a growing threat. Charles struck back with a new article. Monarch CEO faces investor backlash over radical reforms. The piece quoted anonymous sources, claiming Abby's policies were driving away elite patrons, with stock prices dipping slightly. Abby suspected Charles had hired a PR firm to escalate the smear campaign, his influence still potent despite the board's vote. Robert Klein's lawsuit gained traction, with media outlets speculating about Monarch's legal exposure. The pressure was mounting, and Abby's allies warned her to tread carefully. That night, Abby sat in her hotel room, a second anonymous note in hand, delivered to the front desk. "Charles won't stop. Be careful." The words chilled her. Charles's gala warning force is bigger than you now felt like a prophecy. She recalled a board meeting years ago, where Charles had dismissed her push for inclusive service, his smile patronizing. "Stick to what works, Abby." Had he been grooming managers like David to perpetuate this culture? The thought was a knife to her pride. As CEO, she trusted her team, but trust had blinded her. Abby opened her laptop, reviewing data from the pilot. Branches. The numbers were her shield proof that fairness drove profit. But Charles's influence, Tom's rebellion, and the lawsuit were a three-pronged attack. She needed to neutralize them, and fast. Sarah's testimony had swayed the board, but winning the public and her staff required more. Tomorrow, she'd meet Elizabeth Ward, whose support could sway other patrons, and strategize with Patricia to counter Charles's next move. But as the city's lights blinked outside, a new fear took root. If Charles was this relentless, what else was he hiding? The Chicago wind whipped through the streets, carrying a bite that mirrored the tension within Monarch Steakhouse's corporate headquarters. Abigail Abbey Harper stood at her office window, the city's pulse a faint echo against the glass. Her victory in the boardroom had secured her leadership, and her viral press conference, sparking the hashtag Dignity for All movement, had shifted public sentiment, with thousands sharing stories of exclusion at Monarch and beyond. But the battle to transform the restaurant's culture was just beginning. Charles Bennett's media smear and the lawsuit from Robert Klein loomed large, while a second anonymous note, "Charles won't stop," be careful, hinted at a deeper plot. Abby's reforms were gaining traction, but the cost was mounting. Tom Harris's rebellion, Sarah Johnson's ostracism, and a dip in stock prices, fueled by Charles's allies. Monarch's soul needed saving, and she was running out of time. Abby's first move was decisive. She terminated David Miller, the Chicago branch manager whose emails had mandated discriminatory practices. In his place, she appointed Sarah Johnson as Director of Customer Experience, a bold promotion that sent a message. Sarah's quiet courage, her testimony against the toxic culture, had swayed the board, and Abby trusted her to lead the staff's transformation. "I need you to retrain our people," Abby told Sarah in a late-night call, her voice firm but warm. "Show them hospitality means dignity, not dollars." Sarah, now in a modest office at the Chicago branch, felt the weight of her new role. Her first task was to launch a training program focused on unbiased service, ethics, and empathy. The sessions began in a conference room, its walls lined with Monarch's accolades, a reminder of the legacy they were fighting for. But resistance was immediate. Tom Harris, the veteran server loyal to David, led a group of 10 staff members who saw the reforms as a betrayal. "This isn't Monarch," Tom snapped during the first session, his arms crossed. "We're a 5-star restaurant, not a soup kitchen." His allies nodded, their whispers a low hum of defiance. Sarah stood her ground, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "Every guest deserves respect," she said, projecting a slide of customer complaints, Margaret Evans's humiliation, Robert Klein's dismissal. "These aren't just reviews. They're people we failed." Her words hit. Some, like Jake Torres, a young server who'd initially sided with Tom but now shifted uncomfortably. But Tom's scowl deepened, his influence a shadow over the room. Sarah ended the session with a challenge. "If you can't serve everyone equally, maybe Monarch isn't for you." Outside the training room, Sarah faced isolation. Tom's clique shunned her, leaving her out of shift rotations and forgetting to pass on messages. During a busy dinner service, Tom deliberately reassigned her tables to his allies, leaving her scrambling. Sarah's hands trembled as she refilled water glasses, but a memory steadied her. Her first day at Monarch, when a customer thanked her for a kind word, echoing her own experiences of being overlooked. She wouldn't let Tom break her. Abby, monitoring the training through reports from Patricia Sullivan, knew Sarah needed support. She visited the branch, not in disguise, but as CEO, her presence a quiet show of strength. "You're doing what's right," she told Sarah in the back office, her eyes warm. "Don't let them dim your light." But Abby's own challenges were mounting. Charles had escalated his retaliation, convincing 2 major investors to pull funding, citing instability from Abby's reforms. The stock dipped 3%, and a new article, "Monarch's Gamble. Will inclusive service sink the luxury brand?" quoted anonymous sources, Charles's fingerprints clear. Abby suspected he'd hired a PR firm to amplify the narrative, his influence. A web she couldn't yet untangle. The external pressure grew with Robert Klein's lawsuit, now drawing national attention. Abby met with Monarch's legal team, who warned that settling could embolden more claims. But fighting risked further bad press. "We need to show we're changing," Abby insisted, proposing a public apology decline and an invitation to visit the reformed branch. The team agreed, but the lawsuit's timing aligned with Charles's attacks felt orchestrated. A beacon of hope emerged with Elizabeth Ward, a loyal patron whose tweet supporting Abby had gone viral. Elizabeth, a prominent philanthropist, proposed a charity dinner at Monarch to showcase its new vision. Abby seized the opportunity, working with Sarah to ensure the event reflected their reforms. The dinner, held in the Chicago branch's grand dining room, was a triumph. Guests, from executives to community leaders, were served with equal warmth, regardless of status. Elizabeth praised Abby publicly. "This is the Monarch I believe in, a place where everyone feels valued." The event generated positive buzz, with #dignity for all trending again and reservations ticked upward. But Charles's shadow loomed. Abby learned from Patricia that he was planning a shareholder meeting to challenge her leadership, leveraging the stock dip and investor unrest. "He's calling in every favor," Patricia warned. "You need more allies." Abby reached out to Edward Brooks, the board chairman, whose neutrality could sway others. Over coffee, she shared data from the pilot branch's 17% customer retention, growth, and Elizabeth's endorsement. Edward listened, his expression unreadable, but promised to consider her case. Internally, the training program showed cracks. Jake Torres, swayed by Sarah's passion, began advocating for the reforms, sharing how he'd once ignored a modest table to please Tom. "I felt awful," he admitted during a session, his voice breaking. His shift inspired a few others, but Tom doubled down, circulating a petition to reinstate David. "Abby's ruining us," he told his allies, his words reaching Abby through Sarah. The petition, though small, was a spark that could ignite wider rebellion. Abby faced personal strain. 2. A call from her sister, Claire, revealed family concerns about her public battle. "Your name's all over the news," Claire said, her voice tight. "Mom's worried you're risking everything." Abby's throat tightened. She'd built Monarch to honor her parents' work ethic, but the fight was testing her. "I'm doing this for what's right," she told Claire, but doubt lingered. Had she pushed too far? The turning point came when Abby met Elizabeth Ward for lunch to plan further events. Elizabeth shared a story. Years ago, she'd been dismissed at a Monarch branch for dressing casually, an experience that nearly ended her loyalty. "Your changes gave me hope," she said, her eyes earnest. "Keep going." The words rekindled Abby's fire, reminding her why she'd started. Sarah's training gained traction, with Jake becoming a vocal supporter. During a session, he challenged Tom. "If we're so elite, why are we scared to treat everyone well?" Tom's silence was a small victory, but his glare promised retaliation. Sarah, emboldened, introduced role-playing exercises, teaching staff to handle diverse guests with empathy. The shift was slow, but complaints dropped, and positive reviews trickled in. Monarch's service felt genuine for the first time, but Charles's financial assault intensified. A third investor withdrew, citing strategic concerns, and the stock fell another 2%. Abby's legal team reported that Klein was open to settling, but only if Monarch issued a public commitment to reform. Abby agreed, drafting a statement. "We apologize to Mr. Klein and all guests we failed. Monarch is changing." The statement, paired with Elizabeth's event, softened public criticism. But Charles's shareholder meeting loomed that night. Abby sat in her office, the city's skyline a backdrop to her thoughts. The anonymous note's warning Charles won't stop felt prophetic. She recalled a moment from Monarch's early days, when Charles had mentored her, his charm masking a belief in elitism she'd overlooked. Now, he was her greatest threat, his influence a wall she had to breach. She needed evidence to expose him at the shareholder meeting, but time was short. Sarah's progress, Jake's support, and Elizabeth's loyalty were her strengths. But Tom's rebellion and the lawsuit were cracks in her armor. Abby opened her laptop, pulling up Charles's board communications. A buried email from 2 years ago caught her eye. Charles urging managers to preserve Monarch's elite clientele. It wasn't proof of conspiracy, but it was a thread. She needed more testimonies, documents, anything to tie him to David's culture. Tomorrow, she'd meet Robert Klein to finalize the settlement and rally more patrons like Elizabeth. But as the wind howled outside, a new anonymous note arrived, slipped under her door. He's planning something big. Protect yourself. Abby's heart raced. Charles's next move was coming, and she had to be ready or risk losing everything. The Chicago skyline shimmered under a late November dusk, its lights a constellation of ambition that Abigail Abby Harper had once seen as her guide. Now, standing in Monarch's Steakhouse's corporate boardroom, she faced a different battle, one that would define her legacy. The shareholder meeting loomed, a final arena where Charles Bennett, the board's traditionalist titan, aimed to dismantle her reforms. His financial retaliation, investor withdrawals, stock dips, and media smears had shaken Monarch, while Tom Harris's internal rebellion and Robert Klein's lawsuit added pressure. A third anonymous note: he's planning something big. Protect yourself had arrived last night, its warning a shadow over Abby's preparations, but she was ready. With Sarah Johnson's training program gaining ground, Jake Torres's support, and Elizabeth Ward's public endorsement, Abby had built a coalition. Today, she'd expose Charles's role in Monarch's toxic culture and secure her vision of fairness. The boardroom was a fortress of glass and steel, its long table reflecting the faces of shareholders, board members, and executives. Abby stood at the head, her tailored blazer a quiet defiance, her eyes scanning the room. Charles sat opposite, his silver hair gleaming, his smile a veneer of confidence. Edward Brooks, the board chairman, opened the meeting, his voice measured. "We're here to address Monarch's future," he said. "Ms. Harper's reforms have sparked debate. Mr. Bennett has requested this vote to challenge her leadership." Charles rose, his presence commanding. "Monarch is a beacon of exclusivity," he began, his tone smooth but edged. "For decades, we've catered to an elite clientele, delivering unparalleled prestige. Ms. Harper's push for inclusive service has driven away investors, slashed stock value, and invited lawsuits. Her vision risks turning Monarch into a common diner. I move to replace her with leadership that respects our legacy." The room murmured, some nodding, others glancing at Abby. She stood, her voice clear. "Monarch's legacy isn't about exclusion, it's about excellence," she said, clicking a remote to display data. "Our pilot branches, embracing fair service, show a 17% increase in customer retention, 22% in repeat business, and 9% in average spending. These aren't guesses, they're facts." She paused, her gaze locking with Charles's. "The world is changing. Customers value respect over status. Clinging to elitism will make Monarch irrelevant." She slid a folder across the table. "This is evidence of a systemic problem, complaints ignored for years. Emails from David Miller prioritizing wealth, and this," she tapped a document. "An email from Mr. Bennett 2 years ago, urging managers to preserve our elite clientele. This culture didn't start with David. It was enabled from the top." Gasps rippled through the room. Charles's smile faltered, his eyes narrowing. "That's a misrepresentation," he snapped. "I was protecting our brand's core. You're twisting history to justify your crusade." Abby didn't flinch. "History?" she said, her voice sharp. "Like the customer who was mocked for ordering soup, or Robert Klein, whose complaint you dismissed." This isn't a crusade. It's accountability. She turned to the shareholders. I've invited someone who knows this culture firsthand. Sarah Johnson entered, her blazer crisp, her posture steady despite the weight of every gaze. I saw customers ignored because they didn't look rich, she said, her voice unwavering. I was told to prioritize VIPs or risk my job. Ms. Harper's reforms let us serve with integrity. That's the monarch I believe in. Her words landed like a spark, igniting murmurs of approval. Jake Torres, now a training ambassador, stood beside her. I used to follow the old rules, he admitted. But Sarah showed me service means making everyone feel valued. That's what brings people back. Their testimonies cracked Charles's narrative. But he wasn't done. Sentiment doesn't pay bills, he countered, his tone icy. Investors are fleeing. Klein's lawsuit could cost millions. Abby's gambling monarch's future on idealism. Abby seized the opening. Speaking of Klein, she said, he's here. Robert Klein entered, his weathered face resolute. I sued because Monarch made me feel worthless, he said. But Ms. Harper apologized, invited me back, and showed change. I'm withdrawing my lawsuit. That's leadership. The room shifted, Charles's eyes wavering. Edward called for a vote, but Abby raised a hand. One more thing, she said, producing a new document. Last week, Charles attempted to bribe Thomas Reynolds to vote against me. Thomas declined. Thomas, the neutral board member who'd saved Abby before, nodded, his expression grim. It's true, he said. Charles offered me a board seat in another company. The revelation was a thunderbolt. Shareholders whispered. Charles's face reddening. This is slander. He shouted, but Edward silenced him. Enough. We vote now. The ballots were cast, each second an eternity. Edward tallied the results, his voice solemn. By a 2/3 majority, the board removes Charles Bennett from his position, effective immediately. Charles's chair scraped as he stood, his fists clenched. You're making a mistake, he hissed, his eyes boring into Abby. This isn't over. He stormed out, his exit a crack in the old guard's armor. Abby exhaled, her victory bittersweet. Charles's defeat was a milestone, but the war for Monarch's culture wasn't won. She turned to the board. This is a new chapter, she said. We'll prove fairness strengthens us. Shareholders nodded, some hesitant, others inspired. Edward approached her after, his tone cautious. You've won today, Abby, but Charles has allies. Stay vigilant. Sarah's training program expanded nationwide, with Jake as her right hand. They developed workshops on empathy and bias, traveling to Monarch's branches to retrain staff. In Chicago, Tom Harris's rebellion fizzled as Jake's influence grew, though Tom remained a quiet thread, his loyalty to the old ways unshaken. Positive reviews surged. Monarch's service feels human now. I felt valued for the first time. The stock stabilized, and Elizabeth Ward's charity dinners became a monthly event, drawing diverse patrons and boosting reservations. Robert Klein's settlement was finalized, with a public apology and a scholarship fund in his name for hospitality students. His visit to the Chicago branch, greeted warmly by Sarah, was a quiet triumph, his smile a testament to change. But Abby knew challenges remained. Charles's allies leaked a final article Monarch's ex-board member warns of financial ruin, but it gained little traction against #dignity for all single quotes momentum. Abby met Patricia Sullivan for dinner, reflecting on the fight. Charles thought he'd break us, Patricia said, her eyes warm. But you showed what Monarch can be. Abby nodded, but Charles's parting words, this isn't overlingered. She'd uncovered his email, exposed his bribe, but his network was vast. Had she missed something? That night, Abby sat in her office, the city's lights a backdrop to her thoughts. A memory surfaced. Her first Monarch location, a tiny diner where she'd served every guest with care. That vision had been buried under growth, but she'd revived it. Sarah's leadership, Jake's redemption, and Klein's forgiveness were her legacy's new foundation. But a final anonymous note arrived, tucked into her briefcase. You won the battle, but the war never ends. Abby's pulse quickened. Charles was gone, but his warning echoed. She needed to ensure Monarch's change was permanent. Tomorrow she'd meet Elizabeth to plan a national campaign, cementing Monarch's new identity. Sarah and Jake would lead training in New York, while Abby prepared for any lingering threats. As the skyline glowed, Abby felt a quiet strength. Charles had underestimated her, but the fight for fairness was her life's work. Monarch was changing, and she'd make sure it endured no matter what came next. 2 years had passed since a disguised CEO stepped into Monarch Steakhouse's Chicago branch, her quiet presence unmasking a culture of hidden prejudice. On a vibrant April evening, the restaurant's dining room glowed under soft chandeliers, its polished mahogany floors reflecting the hum of a diverse crowd. The scent of grilled steak and truffle butter mingled with laughter, a symphony of connection that Abigail "Abby" Harper had fought to create. Tonight, Monarch was unveiling a new community outreach program, a series of free culinary workshops for underserved youth, funded by profits from its reformed branches. The event was a testament to Monarch's rebirth, a legacy forged not from exclusivity, but from dignity for all. Abby stood at a podium in the restaurant's garden, a lush oasis where a small fountain murmured, its ripples catching the sunset's golden hues. Her tailored blazer was a nod to her leadership, but her warm smile spoke of the waitress she'd once been, serving every guest with care. The crowd, patrons, staff, community leaders, and media listened as she spoke, her voice clear and steady. Monarch was built on a promise. She began, her eyes sweeping the faces before her. A promise that hospitality means making every person feel valued. 2 years ago, we lost sight of that. But together, we've reclaimed it. She gestured to the dining room, where servers moved with genuine warmth, attending to tables of executives and families alike. This is Monarch now, she continued. A place where a single mother can celebrate her child's birthday, where a retiree can dine alone without judgment, where everyone belongs. That's the legacy we're building. Applause erupted, heartfelt and sustained. Abby's gaze found Sarah Johnson, now Monarch's National Director of Customer Experience, standing proudly in a sleek dress, her journey from server to leader, a cornerstone of the transformation. Sarah took the podium, her confidence a far cry from the hesitant server who'd whispered of unfairness. I used to think hospitality meant pleasing the right customers, she said, her dark eyes bright. But Monarch taught me it's about lifting everyone up. Our training program now in every branch ensures no guest is overlooked. She shared a story. A young couple, once ignored for their modest attire, had returned to propose at Monarch, their server celebrating their moment with a complimentary dessert. That's what dignity does, Sarah said. It creates memories. The crowd nodded, some wiping tears as Sarah stepped down. Jake Torres clapping her shoulder with pride. Jake, once a follower of Tom Harris's elitist clique, was now a training ambassador, traveling to Monarch's branches to teach empathy and bias awareness. His transformation was a quiet triumph, his workshops inspiring servers to see every guest as a story, not a status. I was part of the problem, Jake admitted to Abby later, his voice low. But you and Sarah showed me a better way. Abby squeezed his arm, her pride unspoken but clear. Tom Harris's arc had been less redemptive, but not without closure. After Charles Bennett's ousting, Tom's rebellion fizzled, his petition ignored as staff embraced the reforms. He'd resisted until last year when a customer, a retiree he'd once dismissed, thanked him for a kind gesture, echoing Sarah's training. Tom had approached Abby. His scowl softened. "I was wrong," he said gruffly. "This works." He stayed on, his service quieter but fair, a testament to change's slow but steady reach. Elizabeth Ward, the philanthropist whose support had turned the tide, hosted the event, her presence drawing media attention. "Monarch's courage inspired me," she told the crowd, her voice warm. "Abby Harper didn't just save a restaurant, she redefined luxury." Elizabeth's monthly charity dinners had become a hallmark, attracting diverse patrons and boosting Monarch's revenue by 12%. The stock had rebounded, new investors drawn by the brand's inclusive vision, proving Abby's gamble had paid off. Margaret Evans, the woman mocked for ordering soup, sat at a front table, her gray coat replaced by a vibrant scarf. Abby had invited her back, and Margaret was now a regular, her birthday dinners a cherished tradition. "You gave me my dignity back," she told Abby, her eyes glistening. Robert Klein, whose lawsuit had once threatened Monarch, attended too, his case settled with an apology and a commitment to reform. "I came to fight," he said, shaking Abby's hand. "Now I'm here to celebrate." The community outreach program was Abby's proudest achievement. Inspired by her own start as a waitress, it offered teen skills and hope, with Sarah mentoring the first cohort. A young participant, Mia, spoke briefly, her voice shy but clear. "Monarch showed me I can dream big," she said, holding a chef's knife she'd earned. The crowd cheered, and Abby's heart swelled. This was Monarch's true legacy, not wealth, but opportunity. Later, Abby walked the garden with Sarah and Jake, the fountain's murmur a soothing backdrop. "Do you ever think about that first day?" Sarah asked, her smile wistful. "When you sat at my table, asking questions?" Abby laughed softly, the memory sharp. "I was terrified," she admitted. "But you were the spark, Sarah. You showed me what was possible." Jake nodded, his eyes on the crowd. "It's bigger than us now, isn't it?" he said. "Like a ripple." "Exactly," Abby said, her gaze distant. She thought of Charles Bennett, whose exit had marked a turning point. His warning, "This isn't over," hadn't materialized, his allies scattering as Monarch thrived. A final letter from David Miller, received months ago, had surprised her. "I was wrong, Abby. I hope you succeed." It wasn't forgiveness, but closure, a reminder that even the stubborn could shift. The evening ended with a toast, Abby raising a glass. "To Monarch," she said, "and to every person who walks through our doors." The crowd echoed her, their voices a chorus of hope. As guests mingled, Abby slipped away, standing by the fountain, the city's lights a backdrop to her thoughts. Monarch had survived because she dared to ask, what if we did things differently? The answer was before her, a restaurant reborn, a legacy redefined. This story of Abby, Sarah, and Monarch is more than a tale of a restaurant's transformation. It's a testament to the power of fairness and courage. Abby's decision to confront injustice, sparked by a single meal, didn't just save Monarch. It reshaped an industry, proving that dignity isn't a privilege, but a right. Sarah's empathy, Jake's redemption, and even Margaret's resilience showed that small acts, speaking truth, serving with care, can ripple outward, touching lives beyond measure. The humanitarian lesson is clear. Every choice to include, to respect, to fight for what's right, builds a legacy stronger than wealth or status. In a world often divided by difference, Monarch's story challenges us to see each other as equals, to value people over profit, and to act when others turn away. Abby's leadership reminds us that change is hard, but possible, that standing against injustice can inspire others. What ripple will you start? Whether it's a kind word, a bold stand, or a commitment to fairness, your actions matter. If this story moved you, there's more to explore. Subscribe to Legacy Stories on YouTube, where we share tales of courage, compassion, and change that inspire us to live better. Join our community, share your thoughts in the comments, and let's keep the ripples growing. Visit Legacy Stories today because every story can spark a revolution.